So, do you have an A6000 and your footage looks just like this? Well, how about we adjust a few things and get it to look like this? That's much better, isn't it? So in this video, I'm gonna give you a whole bunch of tips to make your videos look much more professional so you can start creating better content in 2021. All right, let's get into it. So as you might know, I do a lot of lens reviews and products of the Sony APS-C range, and I am a really big strong believer in creating professional quality work with budget gear. Now there is one thing that people tend to get lost in, and that's to get the absolute best gear out. Sure, like there is a time and place for these certain tools, but most people think that, you need the Sony A7S III to produce great videos, or, an RE camera or a RED camera. You don't. You really don't. There's certain tips that I'm going to show you that even with the A6000 or any other budget camera for that instance, that you can get some really nice professional looking images. So firstly, I do recommend invest in a couple of things. You're gonna have to spend just a little bit of money, but trust me, this will help you in the long run. I call it investment because you're actually getting something back. And I really think this is important for you to do if you are starting out. So these things you can actually get secondhand. You don't have to buy everything brand new. You definitely don't. You can get them from Marketplace or eBay or Amazon, wherever. I'm not 100% sure. Garage sales. You could go to garage sales if you want. But if you do want to buy them brand new, sure, buy them brand new. Just watch out, obviously, for your budget. So lighting is probably one of the most important factors here. Like if you have poor light in your image, it just simply won't look good. Now this is the problem with you trying to use window, because the sun will go away, it will change the settings. You need to open up the curtains a little bit more. But that's what you're going to be doing. Like if you don't have access to a light, you're gonna have to use the window and use some ambient light coming through. Obviously you don't want direct sunlight to be hitting your face. You want it to bounce off everything around out there and come through nice and soft. It is a very large light source. It's a free light source, so it can be used, but you can see it's actually very dark in here because the sun just went behind the clouds. What you're gonna have to do is increase the ISO up, drop the aperture down if you can. I'm already at 1.4, so I'm gonna have to increase the ISO a little bit. Yes, it may add a little bit more grain into the image, but that's what you're gonna have to do if you don't have a light source and you're trying to use natural light. So let's quickly see the sun's coming back. That's the problem, like I said, using natural light sources. It will keep changing in and out, specifically if there are clouds. So yeah, we'll increase that ISO just to bring those levels up a little bit. Ready? I'll do it during this video. Bring it up to ISO 3200. It's a little bit better. There we go. So I'm at ISO 3200 now, using natural light source coming through the window. I've changed my angle a little bit, so the light's coming still at that sort of 45-degree angle, but it still looks relatively pleasing, right? Like this is a natural light source. I'm not paying for this, it's great, but like I said, there are some pros and cons to this. So we'll go back to what we are our last setup just before. But I do recommend buy a light. One of my favorites is actually the Godox SL60. Now this is a really cheap, powerful light. It's actually lighting us right now. It's really, really good. And I suppose for the price and what you get, it's amazing. But it obviously is paired with a nice softbox as well. Now this gets a little bit tricky. Small softboxes are perfectly fine, they do the job. But a larger light source will always give you a softer light. Then, it'll give you nice softer shadows and it'll look much more pleasing. So this is a softbox right here. Now this is a very, very small softbox. You can see it's actually a little bit harsh. So the settings have been staying the same, just changed it to a smaller softbox and it's too harsh. So I'm gonna actually wind this down just to create a little bit more of a softer fall off. You will have to probably a little bit too less. But you want to try and get that as close to you as possible to create a nice soft small off. But this is a small softbox. I'm going to change it back to the larger softbox. So this is the larger softbox. This is exactly what it looks like. The intensity stayed the same in between the small one and this larger one, but the one thing that changed was obviously just how big the light source is. It is much softer now, and you can see it's a massive difference. And the fall off on this side of the cheek, it just looks much more pleasing. Now what I do is I place my light off to a slight angle, about a 45 to 60 degree angle on this side, but there's a nice sort of smooth transition from light to shade on this side of my face. So essentially a nice gradual soft fall off is probably the thing that you might actually be looking for, because it usually is the most pleasing. Harsh light does create harsher shadows and just usually doesn't look as pleasing. Now you can go a step further and add some background practicals, like, I've done right there. I've got an LED light there. I've got a light behind me as well. I've also got a light there and a hair light up there. I mean, it's a bit of overkill, but what you can also do is put a lamp in the background. It just creates a little bit more depth into the image and just allows you to separate, I suppose, yourself from the background. Now, obviously these aren't absolutely necessary, but I do advise it, and I do recommend, create a little bit more depth between you and the background. Now, second thing I do recommend is changing your camera settings. Now, learning about manual settings is pretty important, to be honest. You need to be sure to keep that ISO as low as you can, because the lower your ISO goes, the less grain you're actually going to introduce into the image. Now, you also have to keep your shutter speed twice your frame rate. So I'm shooting at 25 frames per second. I know some Americans or Northern Hemisphere will shoot 24 or 30 frames per second. So same thing, you just got to shoot at twice your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, you need to shoot at 1/60th. If you're at 24, it should be 1/48th or 1/50th. Now this will give you the most smoothest and pleasing amount of motion blur. So if you are moving around, you'll get some nice motion blur. It won't look unnatural and unpleasing to the eye. Unpleasing? Is that a word? It is now. Now, if you are using a kit lens, this is where it becomes a little bit difficult. You are stuck on its lowest aperture. Now, the kit lens for the A6000 was the 16 to 50, 3.5 to 5.6. So the lowest aperture at 16 millimeters was 3.5. If you did zoom it in a little bit more, then it goes up really quickly to 4, 4.5, maybe 5.6. So it may actually be a good reason to invest in a faster lens. So I'm using the Sigma 30mm f1.4. I've got it at 1.4 right now. And this will allow me to get a little bit more light into the sensor, thus dropping my ISO down to 100 and just giving me a nice pleasing image, because there's a little bit more depth between myself and the background. So the bokeh is really nice on this. Obviously, the bokeh will also change depending on your focal length as well. If you have a longer focal length, it'll compress the background more and give you more bokeh. Now, once you've done those things, your image is probably looking much better, right? What about audio? Now, what you've been hearing this whole time is actually an external mic attached above here onto a boom, directly into my Zoom recorder. Now, I do recommend external audio. It is really good. Obviously, the A6000 doesn't actually have a shotgun mic or a 3.5mm audio jack, so you will need to do external audio anyway. Now, if you are on a budget setup, all you need to do is get a lav mic, attach it to your smartphone, put it into that and record into that. That's perfectly fine. You can get the Rode Smart Lav, do that, attach it into your phone, put it under here, and it will sound much better than what's on the camera right now. Otherwise, if your camera does have a shotgun mic or a 3.5mm audio jack, put a shotgun mic on top and try and get the audio as close as you can. It still won't sound as good if it's on top of your camera, but if it is over the top of your head, it'll sound much more clearer. Now, what you want to do is just make sure the audio doesn't clip. So when I mean by clipping, this is when you talk louder and the image, but the audio starts to clip and lose information. You don't want that. You want to avoid that as much as possible. Trying to keep the audio between -6 and -12 generally works. You can boost it up in post, but just remember, if you do boost it up in post, you're gonna introduce more ambient noise. So you wanna try and get it as perfect in camera or in your Zoom as best as possible. Now you are pretty sweet to start shooting some exceptional videos, except for one more thing, a tripod. Now, you don't actually have to use a tripod if you don't want to. You can use a few books or a box or a table, anything to put on top of a table or something that's nice and high, about eye level. But hey, invest in a decent tripod. I mean, I'm using this one called, I think it's Slik, S-L-I-K. It's a plastic one, it's very small. It does a job. You can get it for about 20 to 25 US on Amazon. You could probably go on Marketplace and get one for 10 bucks. I mean, that's ridiculously cheap. It's like a couple of coffees. So definitely recommend get a tripod. I mean, if you can, get a decent tripod, because when you start, upgrading your gear, at least you've got a decent tripod. But anyway, guys, that is it. That is a nice budget setup. It is nice and easy to do. Yes, you will have to invest in a little bit, but trust me, you'll be making some really, really awesome content for your viewers. And it'll just look much nicer if you take a lot of this away and start applying it to your videos. But yeah, I hope this was helpful or entertaining, and yeah, give it a thumbs up. That would be absolutely amazing. Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content. But other than that, guys, I hope to see you in the next one. Let's get it.